Gold Invest. Explore opportunity.
Hi Glenn, good talking to you again. Happy to get you on this quick call for recap of 2025 and outlook to 2026. And what a year it has been, right? I mean, gold going up relentlessly, silver even going bonkers, as I heard one investor say. And Silver Tiger, of course, making a big leap forward towards production at its Tigre project in Mexico. Let's start with that. Tell me what happened there and what that means for the company, what it opens up.
Well, I think most people, I've been on your interviewed by you previously, I think the last one in August. So, we've always told people what we were going to do. It takes 8 to 10 years to get to the point where we're at now, building a large bulk tonnage deposit at surface and then transitioning to a long life underground mine. We've been telling everybody since we had the project in 2017, that's what we would do. We raised hundreds of millions of dollars in bought deal financings. Big bank syndicates and some of the smartest long-only precious metals institutions in the world gave us that money and said, get to work. Drilled hundreds of thousands of meters, multiple MREs, PEAs, PFSs, and here we are today. But the big news and the big change is all that work has to be done. 8 years of work by our amazing team in Mexico, which my team has roots all the way back to 30 years working with our group out of Halifax. And that culminated in November with, probably one of the most important steps for our company. We received the permit to build our bulk tonnage deposit at surface from the Mexican government. That was the first new permit in Mexico since 2019, 2020. And to build this bulk tonnage deposit, that's an absolutely fantastic coup for our team. There are a lot of large companies vying for those types of permits, and to get the first one in 5 or 6 years, well, that's all my team in Mexico, and they deserve a huge pat on the back. Their vast experience to get us here. So now we sit after raising all that money and doing all that work and doing all those economic studies and engineering plans and mine plans at the point where we are fully permitted for the bulk tonnage deposit, which we are starting to build immediately or have been building for months now as we've got the permit. And then we will transition to an underground deposit. And the first PEA, a preliminary economic assessment bureau for that, is going to come out mid-January. So, do what you say. It's always worked for our team. And, everything we've told the investors that we would do since we started with El Tigre in 2017, we've done. We've raised the large amounts of money to get it to the point where you could build a bulk tonnage and underground mine. All those meters, all those tests, built the team, and now we're sitting here with 50 million USD in excess of that in treasury and starting to build. So exciting times for Tigre and Silver Tiger.
Yes, certainly that's the case, and especially also, as I mentioned, with the tailwinds from the precious metals price environment. So that the decision to go forward with building a mine should have been pretty easy. And as you said, you're already working on that.
Yeah.
You talked about the financing. I think we alluded to that in earlier interviews. So it shouldn't be, again, in this environment with the project you have, with the permit in hand, it shouldn't have be really difficult to raise the I don't know, $80-90 million it is without contingency to build the mine?
So, it's two things. Building mines are never easy. I don't care what the metals price is. And raising the kind of capital to build mines that we need, it's never easy no matter what the price of the metal is. Now, we, in a lower price, in a time when there weren't as many permits in Mexico, raised well in excess of $100 million through that process to get here. And since then, and this year alone, we raised another 85 or 90 million Canadian dollars to get to the point where we have a large amount in treasury. That's the team. This team, I always say, you bet on the jockey, not the horse. Not all teams can raise that kind of capital. And that's what this type of business needs. You can't raise 1 or 2 million at a time and ever think you're going to get to the point where you get to make metal like we will now at the El Tigre mine. So, we've been very successful in raising capital and very well funded. I see no issues with raising the remaining capital to build this project. Our track record in capital has always been very good. And right now, we have on the PFS an $86 million capex. That's US dollars. We have in excess of 50 million of that in the bank today. So, that takes us a long way down the road on the build. And we've really started since the permit to ramp up construction here on this 18-month build for this project, which, at these prices generates absolutely incredible valuation proposition.
Okay, can you give us a bit more detail on that? What you're expecting in your calculations?
Lord, I'd like to talk more about, everybody's talking about $66, $67 silver, $4,400 gold. We never build our business model around that, Bjorn. When I came out with my study only a year ago, we did our study at $2,150 gold and $26 silver. And this project at the bulk tonnage part of the deposit at those prices made about 40 million USD after tax free cash flow a year. So let's talk about consensus pricing. Now, consensus, as you know, is not average. It's what the financial institutions, like a BMO, a big bank, they all give their estimates for 5 years, what they think consensus pricing is. It's way lower than spot. But even those consensus pricing is now over $3,000 and over $35 silver. And they're projecting that out for the next 5 years. At those prices, just the starting point of that bulk tonnage deposit makes about 80 million USD after tax free cash flow. And then it gets to La La Land. And that generates a net present value of 600 or 700 million US dollars. It's an incredible asset. And then, look, I call this the La La Land amount, but you asked what it looks like.
That's my question.
If we had this in production today, somebody asked me this a couple of days ago, and I said, okay, I'll plug these numbers into our model. For just the bulk tonnage portion, the first 9 years, and that's only 60% of that bulk tonnage ore. There'll be a pushback after that. It generates an NPV in US dollars in excess of $1 billion US. I think their IRR is 101%. I didn't even know you could get over 100 until I plugged it in and I had a smile. It pays back all capital in less than a year, but it makes 1.2 billion US dollars over the 9 years after tax free cash flow. I don't plan for that. If we go back to consensus pricing, which I just said, I think it's $3,035 silver. This is such a profitable project. So who knows where we'll be in 18 months, but what gives me great hope is the numbers that we use, consensus, they're really projecting to stay very strong over the next 5 years. And what a great time to be a silver and gold miner in the world in the price environment we're in. So very exciting.
For sure. And as our friend Florian said in his recent update, for a long time you have been, if we were a silver ball, you've been called crazy, really. But that's certainly changed also in the perception of the broader markets, perhaps. You've been mentioning that 18-month timeline. And as it's Christmas is around the corner, let's hope you get your wish granted. That's going to be inside of those 18 months and you started already. Can you just give a short update? What will the immediately next steps be apart from getting the financing done? I mean, you probably already ordered some long lead items. You started to work earthworks, stuff like that.
So I can definitely comment on that. We made the decision, we saw a path that we were going to get our permit probably in the summer. And some of the, and so it just didn't show up in the mailbox one day. You can kind of see the final steps coming together. So, even though we didn't talk about maybe being the first new permit in Mexico and the first bulk tonnage permit in Mexico, that surface mining, we saw it coming. So summertime, the team just sat down, the technician said, look, we need to do our final engineering and with KCA, Capacity, we're the best mine engineers in the world for bulk tonnage surface mining, WSP, who do all of the pads, waste dumps, etc., all that engineering. We wanted to say, let's get that started. That's 6 months. So we saved that because we pulled the trigger months and months before we actually physically had the permit, just because we could read the tea leaves. And so in early January, all those final engineering reports will be completed. They're going to be very exciting to have that done. And, much more moving our costing towards what I would call not, I got to be careful what I say, we're not going to publish a feasibility study, but feasibility study like costing. So save 6 months on that, which was fantastic. The team also then decided on the mountain, look, we just built a 56-kilometer road to El Tigre from the town of Point Morales. We needed to improve that with engineering. We needed to basically look at some components of a bridge we needed to put in there. All of those things, we just got a 6-month head start on to get those things done. Right now, we've got all the costing for the 600-person man camp that we'll need on the mountain, and that will start to be constructed. Final contracts for electricity, a lot of lead items that we started even before we had the final permit approval. And since then, we've just ramped up. People ask they ask my technical team on calls, when do you going to make the construction decision? And they kind of look at me because I'm on the call and they said, I think Glenn made that months ago. So, that's where we are. We're moving ahead. And when you say financing, this is $100 million-ish capex, give or take a little bit. And in the study, it's $86 million. We have more than half of that already in the bank, US dollars. Sometimes they say you have the clock. A friend of mine taught me this. And sometimes you have the time. We now, because of the funds we've raised in the last year, have the time to really drive the project and drive value. And then as we need to get the rest of that capital, I don't lose any sleep over getting the rest of that capital to finish this project. And, I'm leaning towards, of course, debt for that.
Okay, that's a nice position to be in, of course. To wrap this up, and as the year is coming to an end, where will you be, or where would you like to be at the end of 2026? What can investors expect over the course of the year, apart from the stuff you just outlined?
Well, I think let me summarize. We're permitted for the bulk tonnage deposit. We're going to build as fast as we possibly can. We've already started down that path, and we're going to not slow down. Number one. Number two, the PEA for the underground, which is the big second component, that high-grade underground silver mine, which El Tigre originally was, and why we acquired it. People are going to see that first economic test for that, the PEA, in mid-January. Boy, are they going to love what they see. We're going to bolt on more net present value. We're going to bolt on more profitability. We're going to bolt on, more IRR. It's going to be wonderful. You're going to see the kind of grade. That was a high grade underground silver mine the old timers had back in the day. Well, that's what it still is today. So people are going to be excited about that. We're going to start exploring north and south. We've got 25 kilometers of trend. We've only explored 3 or 4 kilometers of it to get to where we are now with all these hundreds of millions of silver equivalent ounces we've added. Teams started 3 or 4 months ago, stepping out, especially to the north. Let's drill off more of that as we go north. That's going to be exciting. And what do we want all this to do? Well, we want to get to the point we make metal, but now we just need to execute. We have one of the best build teams in Mexico, led by Francisco Alvarez. We have the money. We have the paper permits we need to build all of this from the Mexican government. So now what we need to do is just execute. And as we execute, this value will just increase. There's no more wave your hands around, this thinks what we're worth. This will come down to cash flow. As an example, if our NPV at consensus prices for let's talk about the bulk tonnage deposit, the first thing we'll build, that first 10 years of mine life, which will get bigger. If that's at about lower prices, consensus, let's forget about what we're at right now, like $3,500 and maybe $40 or $40 silver, we're talking about a Canadian net present value for that of almost $1 billion. We're trading at $400 million. There's no rocket science in this. When we get that built in 18 or 20 or 60, whatever the months end up being, we will trade at 1.2 or 1.3 times that NPV just on the bulk tonnage. Forget the underground, forget the exploration. That's a 2 or 3 times valuation from where we are now once we're in production. That's where we're going to be. As we do that and get closer, that value is just going to go up. We don't need to discover any more ounces. We will. We don't need to wave our arms around. We just now need to do what we always intended to do. Get this to the point it was ready to build, get the money to do it, get the team to do it, and then get the permit to do it. All missions accomplished. We execute now, and this is going to be an extremely valuable silver and gold producer in Mexico, and the value is going to come along. So those who want to join now at $400 or $425 million Canadian market cap, boy, is there ever a bright future. So in 12 months, let's talk about how we executed all that and where value went. I think we're all going to be very happy.
We'll do that. I hope we'll talk in between, but thank you for giving us the update and outlook, and have a great day. And of course, great Christmas, and we'll talk in the new year.
Merry Christmas, Bjorn, and happy holidays to you and to all those that listen. And we'll talk in the new year. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.